Boom. All right. Tell you what, let's go. All right. My name is Nick Horton. I am the CEO of Think Legal Tech, a Copenhagen-based company that tracks all the innovations happening in the legal tech, RegTech, compliance space, and then helps to bring that to our customers. Joined today by Randeep and Vladimir. I'll let them introduce themselves here in a minute, but quick shout out to Sigma. Thank you, Sigma, Datrix AI, and Sigma Software Labs for putting this together. We're here to talk about the regulation of bank data, and I think more specifically how to manage the regulation of all of that, how to save money, and then especially the bit that I know that these two gentlemen are really going to enjoy getting into is how to unlock the value. Yeah, because far too many people out there look at this and think, compliance, regulation, and expense, as opposed to all the amazing things that it can unlock if you actually get good at it. All right, so the reason for this this podcast today, this webinar today, is to give something back to the communities, to contribute to the discussion, and they empower the people. All of you out there with, for example, loads of data know that this is not easy. Yeah. Thanks for sharing who you are. By all means, if you haven't done so, in the chat button at the bottom, click activate the chat. Let us know who you are. Let us also know what you do and what you're looking to get out of this. There is also a poll down at the bottom, okay? And so you click your way through the poll. That gives you something to do other than looking at our three handsome faces. And it also helps us, again, zero this talk into something that actually gives you value, all right? So, for example, one of the things I'm looking at, interesting, it's okay, retail procurement and operations, Ken Mazzillo in Boston. Where are you looking to go with this? Okay, sorry, Catherine, see, I don't know, the both of you. Where exactly would you like this to take, this discussion to take you? All right, and yeah, so give us some feedback. All right, at the end of this, there is a prize, where you get a 2-hour consultation with some experts in this from Sigma, and 2 hours, you can get an awful lot of knowledge out of 2 hours. So I'd definitely stick around for that. The format of today's call, today's webinar, sorry, is 2 times 10 minutes. Both these gentlemen are going to get a chance to give you their take on how to approach this. And then we're going to go into a Q&A. By all means, shoot us your questions in the chat. And let us know what you think as we go along. All right, this is pretty interactive, and there's only 3 of us involved in this thing, and the other 2 guys are going to do most of the talking. So we've got a good opportunity to answer your questions and make this as relevant as possible. All right, without too much further ado, I think I'm going to turn this over to Randeep, who's going to talk first because he's got the big picture of the industry. All right, I'll say admittedly, big picture within our narrow vertical, and then going to let Vladimir go crazy on the numbers, the AI, the data afterwards. So Randeep Buttar, if you would.
Sure. Thank you, Nick. And I guess depending on what time zone everyone's in, good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, my name's Randeep Buttar, and I'm the CEO and founder of Compliance as a Service Limited. And before I begin, I just want to say, look, it's great to be a part of this. So thank you to both Sigma and Datrix to inviting me along for the journey. Hopefully I'll be able to espouse something useful for those on the call and be able to sort of communicate information that may not necessarily be new, something that you can actually take away and do something tangible with. And of course, I'm really keen to hear from the attendees as well. Really keen for this to be interactive and understand your perspectives, maybe even get some questions too. So a bit about me. So I've been working, I guess, within the financial services industry for about 15 years now, primarily as an independent consultant, occupying many sort of director type roles in the regulatory change space. So I've worked on a number of different initiatives. I'll just name some of those. I've worked on things like the EU Directive on Corporate Governance, which was really around making sure that for payments central securities depository, they had all the necessary processes they needed in place to deliver a cross-border platform for the for transfer of payments across Europe. In addition to that, I've also looked after things like market risk exposures to highly complex traded products, like a cocoa bond. And I'll try not to sort of throw too much jargon out there and too many acronyms. I appreciate that a lot of what I've done is very specific to my sector, so I'll try and unpack it a little bit as well. I've also worked in the communication surveillance space, so actually, monitoring internally banks, traders for their discussions with each other, making sure that they're not rigging rates and things of that nature. So keeping people honest. More recently, my focus has been in the capital markets arena. So regulations like BCBS 239, which was mainly focused on risk data aggregation and risk reporting. So what we mean by that is, where a bank has to demonstrate how it manages its risk, the risk that it holds on its balance sheets, how that is being achieved and how much confidence we have in the underlying data, which I think is quite a key topic that we want to unpack here today as well. And most recently working for a tier 1 bank in the Basel III reform space. So for those of you who aren't aware, Basel III is basically the biggest regulatory framework that's hit the industry since the great financial crisis. And I guess given today's situation, it's even more relevant now. The main thrust of Basel III was just to ensure that from a I guess a systemic risk standpoint, banks were well capitalized. We didn't have to go to, I guess, citizens to be bailed out, the taxpayer. We had provisions in place if, there was a systemic crisis within the industry. Banks are able to wind themselves up without having too much of an impact on, I guess, the surrounding infrastructure. And likewise, when it comes to managing assets, where we have risky assets, we've got enough capital in reserve to offset those assets in times of stress and crisis. Also things like liquidity, leverage, all of that type of stuff that really, before the financial crisis, the regulators weren't really spotlighting too much, were seen as sort of somewhat asleep at the wheel. But obviously since then have become a lot more stringent, a lot more focused. And of course, underpinning all of this is data. Without data, you're unable to really represent the risk position of your bank. You're unable to determine how compliant you are against given regulations. So within that sort of context, I've been involved in delivering change, and change itself can be unpacked into many different areas. So change in relation to IT service management, change in relation to business continuity, change in relation to things like risk reporting, organizational change, system change, data change. So in addition to my work within the industry, I'm also a regular speaker. I go out and I talk about the importance of data in the context of compliance regulation. I also author a blog. I also contribute to some journals as well as contribute to podcasts and webcasts like this one. I'm a committee member of the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment and their FinTech Forum, which is basically a chartered body within the UK, but has a global presence involved in the certification of financial services professionals. And obviously very interested in where fintech is taking the industry in general. So broader than just regulation, that covers everything. Anyway, so my perspective today, as Nick sort of alluded to, is going to be along the lines of, why data is important to regulation, and also why that data, if used correctly, can actually be leveraged to deliver operational efficiencies, operational change, and ultimately cost saves. Because right now we're operating in an environment where, you know, the margins are squeezed for banks, and they have been since the financial crisis, and that's only gotten worse now that the banks are being asked to take on a lot more debt, and potentially very bad debt, which is going to be backstopped by governments just to get the economy going as a result of you know, the seizure of the economy, I guess, is the best way to describe it in this current pandemic scenario. And so a lot of the focus is about how do you sort of unlock the potential of your data to make yourself more competitive and more efficient. So yes, you can actually achieve operational gains, but you can also make yourself a little bit more competitive in the marketplace because the underlying data sets are the same. And that's something that I'm hoping that we can unpack as we go along. So so that's all from me for now. I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion with Vladimir and Nick. So thank you, Nick.
Cool. Cheers. I love it. This is about more than just obeying the law. Cool. Vladimir.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Randeep. Hello, everyone. My name is Vladimir Sofinsky. I'm a co-founder and head of data science at Deutsche Bank. My background is maybe a bit shorter than Randeep's, but I also have quite a good experience in banking. I've been working for a London top-tier investment bank in their back office for roughly 3 years. I've been doing mainly the quantitative analysis and data analysis job there, and we were working with Basel 3 as well there. And after that, I switched like purely to data science and have been working in data science, basically managing the team for almost 3 years as well. And now we started the Datrix AI, which is basically a platform for easy data science. It's a very, very graphically easy and simple platform that doesn't require pretty much any coding skills. And it just dramatically lowers the entrance barrier for data scientists, as well as for practitioners. It simplifies the ML ops a lot. So if you want to build like simple, easy, and very fast data science pipelines, just like play with our platform. And currently the demo is free for that. Today I mainly am going to talk about the data science in general in banking and how the banks can leverage the data. Like banks are currently like one of the biggest industries in terms of AI adoption. So I'm sorry for my English. My English is not my first language. I might lose some words.
Yeah, you're doing well. You're doing well.
Basically, retail and banking are top 2 industries currently adapting AI, and AI is expected to like save over $1 trillion by the end of the decade for the banking industry alone. And the banking industry is expected to spend around $5 billion on implementing the AI solutions in the next 2 years only. So the data itself, as Randy mentioned, like data can be used in various ways, except for like not only by the regulations, but also you can pretty much monetize the data or decrease your costs right away. So if your industry or banking specifically is gathering a lot of data, you can use that. You can use that to decrease your costs. You can use that to target your customers better, or you can just use that to optimize your operations and bring like additional value with that. So like the biggest challenge with banks is a lot of banks are using this like old legacy systems, the very big and very difficult to modify modify systems that were like some are written like in COBOL, some are written in C or C++, and those are usually like quite difficult to work with. So this is why the platforms that like pretty much can connect to your data lake or any data storage and do the data science pipeline separately and just easily integrate on the very end with your existing systems are on the rise right now. And it's like very, very important because frankly speaking, like across the industry and generally in data science, like more than half of the projects related to data science never go to production. Like the big problem with that is like, first you have a lot of data and you're wondering, hey, can I actually use this? Does it have predictive power? Will it like even potentially save me money? So you would start with something like a feasibility study or proof of concept, and then you have like really nice results. So you like allocate some resources to that, start building the product, and at the very end you understand like that the proof of concept does not scale very well in the production. So for example, running a daily model in proof of concept was nice, but if that model on your full data set runs for 3 days, you cannot do that like daily. So this is why like having a unified tool that allows you to do the prototyping, do the feasibility studies, and then very easily scales up to any amount of data and integrates easily with your current infrastructure may help quite a bit. Like, and the problem usually is that a lot of data scientists on the market don't know too much about banking, and a lot of people with experience with banking don't know too much about data science. And basically you either can like try to find a person who is like jack of all trades, but usually it's going to be either very costly or, you know, jack of all trades, master of none. And this is why like the platforms are also quite useful, because banks usually have their own very like nice analytics departments who just don't have too much experience with data science. Or for example, the analysts just don't have enough experience in writing code alone, right? And if you have platforms that would allow them to do like data science related jobs without writing the code, like that might help a lot. And we see that the platforms of those kinds are also like on the rise a lot right now. I believe that's more or less it from my side right now. I believe we're gonna like come back to this a bit more and maybe talk about more specific use cases.
Yeah, because it's like the specific use case. You had a great line. You mentioned the scalable proof of concept. Gosh, you don't reach my age without having thought, you know, oh my God, yeah. Could have seen a couple more of those in my time. And so I was thinking an example maybe and I'd like to keep this as focused on examples, and let's try and get as many specifics as possible to try and connect with the audience here. How to quickly do a scalable proof of concept. I thought, yeah, you know, how quick can we, because one of the challenges we always have with these types of things is explaining it to the rest of our colleagues that don't necessarily understand what it is we're doing. So how do we show them some value as quickly as possible? I was thinking, do you guys have examples of some of these proofs of concepts that you've been able to do, let's say low investment, high payoff, or let's say high payoff and being able to show your colleagues what it is that this lets you do, why they should invest time and resources in it?
I think that's a really good topic to kick off with. So one of the roles that I occupied quite recently was head of data strategy and innovation. And so with my innovation hat on, you know, we went out to our organization and we started polling them for use cases. I was quite fortunate in that I was working within an environment where innovation was encouraged quite extensively. The head of our risk transformation department was you know, quite supportive. Helped create a framework within which you could actually contribute ideas into a centralized hub and almost crowdsource those ideas. And then every so often, the top 5 would be selected for, basically a proof of concept. And the going in mindset was 90% of this stuff is going to fail, but that's okay. You have the freedom to fail as long as you try. And the key thing was to really be able to demonstrate the value in the proposition and what it is you were trying to do. And so once you've got that sort of framework in place and you've got management supporting you in doing so, actually it becomes quite a almost competitive thing amongst the staff, because when they feel empowered to do it, they're happy to do it over and above their day job, because they would be incentivized with even just bragging rights to say, okay, well, look, my idea got selected. And then if it went through that first stage of, okay, this looks like it could actually generate benefit, and benefit in terms of not just sort of being able to generate profit or revenue for the bank, but also just improve the way in which people work, make their work lives a bit more efficient, get them out of the repetitive activity and more into the thinking stage of their day job, then actually that was seen as something beneficial and that was encouraged. And so those ideas could then be taken over by SMEs who can then do the coding, as you were saying, Vladimir, and actually take those ideas and build the infrastructure behind it in a sandbox environment, continue to prove it out, and then of course scale it where appropriate. Now, I think it's probably worth, there's so many different types of innovation that are, gripping banks at the moment. RPA is one of them, repetitive process automation, essentially the use of bots to sort of automate basic activities like, you have credit analysts that will go in every day. They have to sort of take a dump of data off, say, Bloomberg, download it, extract it, download it, paste it into CSV, map it against some internal data, run some macros, and essentially end up with a result that they then have to email to a bunch of people. That could take up to 45 minutes to an hour every single day of this person's life. And actually, to automate that using RPA, you can sort of, do that within a couple of minutes, screen scrape, run the macros. The whole thing is repetitive. And I think the tools are now becoming available, which makes that a lot easier. And I actually like this concept of almost, we call it citizen development, whereby somebody who's not a coder is able to use drag or drop techniques to just basically through an interface generate code. And that is empowering in itself. I just want to make a few comments on things like scale and complexity as well, though, because I think if you're a vendor and if you're trying to sell into some of the big banks, or even not even a big bank, maybe even a smaller bank like a national bank, the thing is, I mean, I operate currently in an environment where my particular bank has operations in 66 countries. They've got about 39 million customers and about 210,000 employees. So they're very vast, very complex. It's the other end of the scale. So to be successful in an environment like that, not only do you have to prove yourself out in a local manner, but then you have to demonstrate the ability to scale across a multitude of complex environments. And system integration is absolutely key, because a lot of the banks, especially the European banks, one of the reasons why they had problems in the last financial crisis is because they had evolved over decades through mergers and acquisitions. So they'd accumulated a lot of systems from the banks that they had absorbed. And, they weren't so great at cross-functional integration or cross-system integration. And so they ended up with this quagmire of a systems landscape and what we call today technical debt. Which is okay if you're in a straight through processing siloed environment and the systems can handle it. But as I mentioned earlier, because we're in an environment which is essentially quite sort of low in volume, and margins are being squeezed, you actually need more cross-functional integration across the business lines, across the functional lines, whether it's your private bank, your commercial bank, your retail bank, finance, risk. All these areas actually need to be highly integrated in order for you to actually gain some form of efficiency. So whatever you're trying to do, it's got to be agile, it's got to be nimble, it's got to work across that environment. And so the integration point that Vladimir made earlier, I think is absolutely key. And I'll just pause on that. I think that's my view on that particular topic.
Yeah, I was going to say, Vladimir, you got any examples of this?
So one of the things that comes up to my mind right away is Randeep mentioned like automation, right? And while I was working at the investment banking, quite a few analysts were just like drilling into the code and figuring out like how the calculations work. Because due to PRA requirements, quite a lot of algorithms need to be like upgraded or updated or changed right away. And like in a big bank where basically we were calculating, I believe, over 3.5 million of trades worth of NPV into, I believe it was 67 tenors. So I believe that was like around 50 years to the future. And we were running Monte Carlo. So like that was quite a lengthy process. So like the one batch run would take around 24 hours. The problem with that is like if you are upgrading your system on the weekend, it might be quite problematic if you have some like delays or something, and on the Monday you cannot start. And we implemented like quite simply AI for that, but basically we had like the health status dashboard. And what that was doing, it was pretty much just parsing the logs and trying to do some like anomaly detection and root cause analysis for like what went wrong. And it was very easy because, for example, if the director is like, hey, I don't like these numbers, he tells the analyst to drill into them. And like the analyst can spend like 2 hours, 4 hours, 6, 8 hours, just like figuring out which one trade like overshot the NPV and everything looks terrible. And like we automated that where basically anybody can figure out like which one specific trade or one specific algorithm was breaking the threshold or was looking like an anomaly. And the analyst, instead of like drilling down into trying to find the root cause, they were looking at the algorithm right away and trying to figure out where the formula is wrong or like where the calculations are wrong. And that just like, the cool thing with AI is you can automate a lot of stuff, but the best thing is you automate a very routine tasks. So that's a cool thing about AI.
We see this all the time in legal, where everybody talks about wanting to automate sort of what happens in the courtroom, the courtroom battles that you see. No. Let's start with the really basic stuff of sifting through the kilometers of documents that go into major court cases. So when you say, automating the basics, I'd love like a specific example of something like, knowing where to look. Oh my God, knowing which question to ask is way more important than having the right answer, because getting the right answer is just a matter of time, but you can save a huge amount of time if you know where to look. Do you have some examples of this, either of you?
So one more thing that also comes to mind is where we were helping like the help desk to automate their job. And like after some analysis, turns out that like around 60 to 70% of the cases is like a person cannot connect to the printer or they forgot their password. And like those two things can be so easily automated. So that's pretty much what we did. We just put the chatbot that was automatically assigning the tickets. If the tickets didn't need like manual intervention, we would just trigger some PowerShell scripts and automate everything. And like the main thing with this is it decreased the response time for critical issues quite a bit. And for people who would just like call the support and spend like 5 minutes trying to reset their password, it was made pretty much like instantaneously.
So it's a super question, because Haley just wrote in, junior employee working in front office. So mainly on sales and product management, out of reach with the innovation team. I've seen this before. And so, the people at the front with the problems, how do they get a hold of people like you? Oof. Yeah, have front office teams in a bank been helpful in the digital transformation process? You swear you want to say yes, please. But we've often seen a disconnect between the front and the back.
A lot of it is down to the prevailing culture. I mean, from my perspective, people like Haley are absolute gold. You know, we're on the hunt for SMEs. We're looking for people like you who are in the front line, who understand the business, who understand the nature of the actual products themselves. And so therefore is our best place to make recommendations. Leave the tech stuff to the tech guys, but actually what we need from you guys is how, you know, just your ideas and your thoughts around how we can improve our processes and you know, do it in a way that's going to be generally beneficial. And I think quick go ahead.
Randeep, is oftentimes it's not so much what is the solution, but it's explaining what the problem is.
Yes.
I had an example of it. We got a new piece of technology that was an upgrade, and it replaced a there was a thing, I had a question, I pressed a button and I got an answer. That was replaced with something that was 12 steps and took half an hour. So 5 seconds, one button, 30 minutes, 12 steps.
Right.
But until I wrote it down in an email, and it took me an hour to write down all the different steps I had to do, nobody above me understood it. They said, oh, but we've upgraded that. I said, upgraded my foot. You know, you've actually made my life much more complicated. But until I explained it, the problem in detail.
And I think you've just hit on the key point there. I think the answer really for Haley here would be actually to try and come up with a very clear and crisp articulation of what the problem is. So define the problem statement, right? And it's almost like you want a mini business case. So you want something short, sharp, and punchy, which basically explains to management that we really do have an operational problem here. And then go into, like, in a way, you don't necessarily have to even identify the solution, because ultimately that's up to them to come up with. They need to throw resources at your problem to sort of refine the business case. But I think if you can demonstrate quite quickly that, okay, you know, right now I've got a process, it involves me picking up the phone, speaking to multiple people, having to query data from multiple different data sets, going through a number of clicks on the screen, copying and pasting left, right, and center. Whereas actually, you know, if you can just articulate that almost exactly how Nicholas described in his example with, it's this number of clicks, it's this many hours, it's this many people that I need to interact with, wouldn't it be great to have something that allowed me to just completely reduce that? And, you know, then I can spend my time more effectively and efficiently, almost like as an analyst. And I think that really is the future for employees. If you sort of project your mind into where, you know, everyone's going in the direction of automation, less and less so. If you're involved in repetitive activity in your day job, you can almost guarantee that that job probably won't exist in a couple of years' time. And so, you know, a lot of us have to reskill right now and start focusing on the things that are actually going to bring value rather than repetitive activity. So if you're able to articulate that to your management team, I think that's probably the starting point, is come up with that mini business case, outline the benefit. The benefit can be broken down into a number of dimensions. It could be a cost benefit, it could be an effort benefit, it could be a product benefit. A benefit to the customer is always like top on the list for everyone, right? So if you can say that actually this will benefit our customers. I know that if you look at some of the banks out in the Near East, you know, the time it takes them to approve a loan request or reject a loan request, you know, they can do it super, super fast. You know, we're talking a matter of hours, in some cases, even minutes, because it's all automated now. The credit checks, the information's available. Whereas a lot of banks in the West are still sort of running through quite a lengthy process to get through that cycle. And again, that's with the customer in mind. So, you know, you're going to get a lot more traction if you can demonstrate how this will give your organization the ability to get more traction with its core customer set.
Yeah, Vladimir, I was wondering if you could give us, let's say, at the investment bank, what was it that for example, you're talking about, a calculation that ran 24 hours, or things that the traders needed help with. What kind of problems are you seeing that you're addressing with AI? What are these?
The problem is, again, like we have a very, very simple mechanical task that is like, something is wrong, find what is wrong. And at the same time, it's a very routine task, and the task that requires a lot of time to investigate into. And if you can automate that, so for example, the director would write somebody and tell like, hey, this number is bad, what is wrong? and he wants to see the answer. Like he wants to see the answer ASAP. And for example, we had this dashboard, so I would write him in 10 minutes and say like, hey, this is like a specific trade. Something is wrong. Like I am investigating this specific algorithm and I'm 100% sure it is like the culprit. That is a way better approach than like saying, hey, I'm looking into that. And like maybe 4 hours later, you can understand what the actual root cause might be. Very like, I'm not sure if.
Yeah, no, it is difficult. Let's see.
I mean, I can, I think just coming back to your question around sort of real world examples, right? So I like to sort of use this quite often in my discussions, which is a scenario. It's 2007, the Fed or whichever regulator sort of approach a bank and they say, okay, like, tell us what your exposure is to Lehman Brothers. We all know that Lehman Brothers went over. It was quite a significant news event in the financial industry. And when they asked that question, a lot of the American banks who had actually got quite good infrastructure, quite clean, they were able to turn around the response quite quickly. They just poll their systems, bring the data back, and they're able to say, okay, right, well, these are exposures, Fed, this is how risky we are to the system. Unfortunately, a lot of the European banks, actually a few months later, were still scratching their heads because they just couldn't get the data. And one of the things that we did as we were solving for BCBS 239, there's a principle in there, there's a requirement which is about being able to respond to a regulator during times of stress and crisis, an ad hoc request, not just your regulator, but it could be your external auditor, it could be an industry analyst, it could be a senior manager, somebody from the C-suite. They just want to know, okay, well, what's your exposure to China? What's your exposure to the housing market? How can you go away and provide that information? Now, this is where I think we come back to the data story, right? The thing with banks is that it's not that you don't have enough data. We've got tons and tons of data. And actually, a lot of the data is quite structured. Yes, there's a lot of unstructured data out there, but a lot of the data is structured. The challenge is that it's living in silos. So, you've got systems here that focus on sort of the risk exposure to a particular product. Then you've got systems over here which are finance in nature and more focused on the P&L and the balance sheet. And actually, the alignment of those two sets of systems is what the challenge is right now. And so one of the things we had to develop was basically an ad hoc request management, which was a bit of workflow, but also a bit of chatbot as well, whereby stitching together data from finance risk, country data, regional data, portfolio data, and actually reading across the set is unlocked so much potential. It unlocked the ability to answer questions related to exposure in a way that was swift and quick, that didn't require people running around to multiple countries, getting it wrong, trying to answer via email exchanges, actually single source of truth. And I think if you just unpack that a little bit, and maybe we can talk about it a bit later in the discussion, is, what are the fundamentals? What are the basics around data principles that will allow you to be, save costs and actually generate some form of efficiency?
Because there is this, when we say compliance, there is often this feeling that sort of everything needs to be checked, everything needs to be and that's not how any inspection work in any system. You sample, you check, and you go for representative sample, and so you're looking across systems rather than trying to usually check everything. Sometimes some regulations that, and so with I think one of the fears of going into an awful lot, that's one of the concerns we were talking about previously before the call, was that was data. Is your data good enough? Do you have enough of it? Do you have, oh my God, how are we ever going to get all these data sets aligned? And oftentimes they don't need to be complete. They don't need to be perfectly aligned. You don't have to have perfect data. You just have to have enough data to be able to do a couple of checks to give yourselves an indication. Is that making sense? This is something that we can also do here, to do checks across different data sets. We don't have to pool everything into one huge lake and have one ring to rule them all. We can do checks back and forth between them to give us valuable information.
Yeah, that's like totally how like pretty much all data science and all statistics in general work. Like if you are making soup, one spoonful is enough to taste the soup. You don't need to eat the full pot.
Yes.
And like this, the same is with the data. If you have like if the soup is stirred properly, it means like you can sample a very tiny portion of it. If your data is representative of all the big pool you have, you can like work with a very little part of it and do again the feasibility study or the concept and figure out if you can get the value of that, or if you can check if everything is healthy enough, or pretty much do the A/B testing again. Everybody is interested in A/B testing. You don't actually need to split your day, like all your customers in two and do the A/B testing there. You can like split them in 20 different segments and like work with each of them in parallel. Like you don't need to work with everyone to be like statistically and significantly sure that all your calculations are correct.
So we're talking about sample setting the data essentially. I mean, one of the areas that I'm really interested in at the moment is graph technology, graph stores. And so most people, when they approach data historically, you know, if you think about the way in which typical old school reference data are set up, you know, they're highly structured, primary key, foreign key joins, that sort of thing. But actually, if you look at, some of you may remember the Panama Papers, where a group of journalists got together and they read across, I think it was something like 30 terabytes of unstructured data. We're talking about data in PDFs, Word documents, as well as Excel files, right? And they were able to sort of make inferences and joins from that vast data set within a matter of months using graph technology. And essentially what graph does is it disambiguates the entire data set. It makes every single bit of data a foreign key, as long as you can create a dictionary that allows you to describe what each element is. You can then start linking things up in a way that you never could before. And I think that the benefit in that, you know, for anyone that's interested, that's looking into it, and I know that a lot of the data science leverages this sort of storage capability, you know, look into graph stores, look into triple stores, they're also known as, which essentially means that you take any bit of data from your data set, as long as you define the relationship from one entity to the other, you can actually read across a multitude of data sets and just get inferences that you never would have been able to achieve, or would have taken you a very long time to achieve historically. Yeah,
listen, we had, I'm a bit of a fanboy for the company that organized the Panama Papers. It's a company called Neo4j, and they've got a great CEO, a fellow called Emil Ephraim, who did a live demo when he came and spoke at a conference for us last year. And it turns out one of my neighbors was listed in, he typed in, you can access the entire Panama Papers sandbox, and he typed in Panama Papers Copenhagen, and one of my neighbor's addresses came up.
Did you ask him for a loan?
Yeah, I'll admit I was a little cautious. I'm not sure I want to know. You know, it's a nice neighborhood. My kids bicycle. We bicycle right by this place on our way to school. But in any case, yes, strong recommendation for Neo4j. Listen, looking at a couple of the polls and things that you guys asking, I always love this with how to get going, right? Love the question from Haley. And I really liked our answer, which is, you know, listen, describe the problem that you're facing. Now looking at what's the biggest challenge your business faces to achieving data-driven digital transformation, beyond the obvious that there's a hell of a lot of digital transformation that hasn't happened. There's a whole bunch, you know, just look at how many people are discovering video conferencing for the first time during the Corona crisis. But so a lack of technical expertise, a lack of clear vision and strategy, money is always an interesting one. I keep coming back to that. How do we get started? If I could throw out a couple of things, this proof of concept, this coming up with something with like nothing succeeds like success. You know, if you've got a nice proof of concept, it makes it easier to go back to the boss and say, hey, listen, look what we did with the 5,000 or the 10,000, the 25,000 euros you gave us to start something, the 100,000, you know, the little bit of money you gave us, look what we got with that. Imagine what we could do if you gave us more. And so people often worry, do I have enough data? What if my data doesn't look fantastic? How about we take data as our first challenge and say, like, you know, how much data do people need to have access to, and how clean does it need to be be able to draw anything useful out of it?
So we did a lot. Well, so one of the things I was asked to do a couple of years ago was actually help a new chief data officer establish a complete framework for data management and data governance. And it very much is about going back to basics. So the first sorts of questions you might ask is, okay, well, what is data? You know, what data am I actually looking at here? Because a lot of people have been like, you know, you go through, I suppose, fads, don't you? So one fad was data lakes, you know, big Hadoop clusters, massive stores of data. The new fad is get it all onto the cloud. But actually, if your data lake has got a bunch of data within it that's unidentifiable, it's effectively a data swamp. And if you just literally lift and shift that to the cloud, you're recreating the swamp in the cloud. So
yeah, but
being able to tag, absolutely, yeah, cloud is not a cost saver. It's more of an enabler for better analytics, but that's about it. And so, you know, we've done the analysis on the numbers there. So I think I'd say there's probably 4 steps, right? Step 1 is be able to identify your data. Make sure your data is linked up to a good conceptual data model, and has got definitions within that hierarchy, right? You know, definitions are quite key. That's probably your linchpin, your starting point. Beyond that, you can then enter into conversations around, okay, well, where should I be getting my data from? As an organization, you don't want to be getting the same data from multiple places, multiple vendors. You can incur costs as a result of that. So to reduce your costs, standardize your golden sources for data, and make sure that for any given type of data, you're getting it from one designated distributor. You can then start having conversations about data flow and lineage as well. So where is my data coming from? Where is it going to? How many hops are along the journey? Actually, is there an efficiency opportunity there whereby I've got data just circling around a number of loops unnecessarily, or going offline into somebody's sort of, you know, own developed application within Excel or Access, stored on their desktop, which becomes a single point of failure? You can actually spotlight those issues, rip them out of your flow, and clean things up a little bit. The third point is really quality. I think in order for you to sort of do all the great stuff that Datrix are doing in the data science space, you need to make sure that you've got good control around your data, and your data is of a good enough quality. And I think Vladimir might have mentioned this on our prep call earlier today, where, you know, in the end of the day, the AI is only going to be as good as the data going into it, right? So if it's garbage in, garbage out, if your data isn't of a good enough quality, and what I mean by that is, you know, your data is accurate, right? It's coming from the right place. It's being produced in a timely fashion. You're not rolling forward previous runs of data, and it's complete. You've got a complete data set, as well as other things like just basic data validity and formatting rules and the rest of it, you know, checksum checks, for example, right? So all of that really needs to be part of your data management lifecycle. And I think once you've got those sort of 3 stages sort of in play, you know, the 4th stage is, okay, well, you can at least then move forward with a degree of confidence, knowing that at least the data that you're working with is something that you can believe in, you can stand by. And it becomes very important, especially when you're producing reports for the regulator, producing reports for senior management, that, you know, you can stand up with confidence and say that I believe in this. Not just because it's a nice to have. I'll just land one final point. You know, there is something called the senior manager certification regime, whereby you can actually now go to jail if you get those things wrong. You know, so accountability is being driven out on a personal basis. I don't believe anyone's gone to jail yet, but in principle, that's the ramification of doing it wrong, right? So I would say, you know, there's a lot to do in the data cleansing, data management space. And once you've built those foundations, you know, you're off and running as far as data science is concerned. I mean, Vladimir, what do you think?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you in terms that like data science or machine learning as good as the data that goes in. At the same time, like we can see like one again of the reasons why the platforms like Datrix are on the rise right now is what Nick mentioned. Like sometimes you can say to your boss, like, hey, you gave me, I don't know, 1,000, 25,000, how much? And like, imagine what I can do with more. And that's the good thing with rapid prototyping. Like you can figure out if your data, so you mentioned you have a swamp, right? Sometimes regulations would require you to have a swamp, and that's like enough. Then you have to figure out if it's worth upgrading that, if it's worth like structurizing and cleaning up the data. And like rapid prototyping will help you with that a lot. Like if you can spend a minimum time trying to figure out if you can like extract meaningful insights from your data, or you can extract actual like monetary benefits from your data, that's a very, very good incentive to start working with your data, structurizing it, cleaning it, and like working with it. And also like quite often you like can have the problems and you might not be sure how to solve them. So like intuitive platforms might help you with that as well. So if the platform automatically says, hey, you have a lot of missing values here, how would you like to replace them? And there are like automatic treatment for that. Or sometimes you might not be aware, but you have like outliers or anomalies. And like looking for that manually is going to be a pain in the back. If you have a framework that will tell you, hey, this is the outlier, how about you like check if it's okay? If it's not okay, let's replace it a bit.
So if we want to do a proof of concept, I mean, yeah, how small can these proof of concepts be? If let's say if I'm looking for anomalies, is it in, how small can my data set be if I'm looking to do a trial?
So that depends on like case-to-case basis, right? So,
but if we just take for example, a client you've done something small for, just give us an industry and then an idea of how much data we're looking at.
We did a very small proof of concept where basically we were giving, I believe it was like a few hundred megabytes of data, and that's a tiny amount. You can work with that on a like home computer, or like you don't need cloud or anything. And we were able to figure out like how much money we can potentially save, you can statistically calculate if your actual whole data set is the same structure as the one you provided, you can save this much, and this is like the confidence interval on how much money you can potentially save. And then we started working with the actual data set, which was over 1 terabyte. So potentially you can have less than 1% of the whole of your whole set of your data, and work with that right away to figure out like if it makes sense and if it brings value.
Yeah, and a quick example of from the Panama papers that we were talking about before was it was all completely unstructured data. I think it was 1.2 million documents, and like Randeep saying, it was PDFs, it was everything, all mixed in together. And so what the graph database did was it looked at each piece of information as a separate node and then looked for similarities. And so then what it found is it just started turning up odd coincidences. And one of them it turned up was it had there was a company listed in Panama that had the same home address as the Prime Minister of Iceland. And so that was obviously interesting. And so they looked at that and then they found out, well, it's listed as somebody, it's not, and then they looked on Wikipedia. They're like, okay, the Prime Minister of Iceland, his name is X. There's somebody listed that same last name, different first name. Ah, it's his wife. And they wrote, dear Mr. Prime Minister, why do you have an account? Why does your wife have? My wife, I have nothing. 48 hours later, he was the former Prime Minister. But so many, even unstructured data, you can look for anomalies, you can look for comparisons. It is, because I definitely deal with this. Oh my God, just starting a new company and then trying to, let's say, transfer databases between one HubSpot account and another HubSpot account. Sigh, But there are tools that let you do this. And depending on what you're looking for, it's about asking, a lot of times it's about asking the right questions. You guys got any examples of, let's see, proofs of, Randy, you got a proof of concept, like how do you get going with, I mean, in HSBC, these mega, it's hard to find bigger banks. You know, and yet, so then how does somebody in a small office or a small piece of it say, oh, I've got an idea, and then get allowed to do anything?
Well, so as I mentioned earlier, we've got got quite a vocal protagonist for innovation within our midst, and you know, what's happened there is it's actually quite unique in that people are incentivized by the fact that their name is associated with a given idea. And so the first thing is create the framework, create the infrastructure within which an idea can even be put out into the public. And what's quite cool about this particular system is that I can raise an idea or you can raise an idea. That idea then goes into the inbox of anyone that's subscribing to this particular idea hub. And anyone from around the world can then join that team, right? So if I raise an idea within the UK, you're based in Netherlands, and Vladimir is based in the Ukraine, actually the two of you can just join my idea and say, actually, yeah, I'm going to like that. It's almost like a Facebook for innovation. So it's like, I'm going to like that idea and I'm going to join that team and I'm going to start providing information into it to help sort of create this groundswell, almost like a snowball effect of momentum behind it. So you've got your idea, you start refining it, you start adding your business case elements to the idea. And then at that point, you're in a position to then sort of go out and really just seek some initial stage funding. I mean, funding, you're always going to hit the funding challenge. And I think at the moment, I've got to be honest, you know, funding is going to be tight in this current environment. It's going to be really, really hard to drive through innovation at a high cost. You know, it's seen as a luxury still by a lot of people. So there is a bit of a cultural change needed in the industry. But if you can get people, get the SMEs, like the coders, the developers, the data scientists, the machine learning experts, to sort of look at your idea and be willing to sort of, to Vladimir's point, don't boil the ocean, grab a sample set of data, do a little bit of coding at the side of your desk, demonstrate that this can be done and it can be done in a repeatable way and it can be scaled. Then you'll be in a position to actually then start saying, actually, this is beneficial. We've tried it. We've tested it within a sandbox. We can now look to scale it and make it even enterprise grade. And I think the other thing to think about when trying to drive innovation is, you know, not turn your nose up at vendors like, you know, like Datrix, for example. I mean, a lot of organizations in financial services have a DIY approach. You know, they want to do it all themselves. And more often than not, they just haven't got the right skills. So they tend to learn on the job and then they slow themselves down. And actually, sometimes they just fail. They create technical debt. Then they have to go and get somebody in to unwind what they've done at higher expense. So I think there's also the need for a cultural change, which says, actually go out there and get the experts, get them to come in, do it right, do it once, hopefully. And you know, and then that way you get the full benefit. So I think alongside the idea, the business case, the proof of concept within a sandbox, you know, leveraging internal SMEs, when you get to a stage where actually you just know that this requires a specific skill set, go out to the market and get it. Because, you know, there's a lot of people, a lot of companies out there who would be willing to actually almost do the initial trial work for free, just to demonstrate their own wares, you know. And then, you know, look into sort of a more formal partnership. Hopefully that answered the question. I'm not sure it did. I went on for a bit there.
Yeah, it's a good start. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, this proving the value always helps if you got a customer saying, you know, yeah, if you do that, I'll buy it. Trying to think.
Maybe like a small example from my side. Like we had like a customer. It wasn't actually banking. It was a retail customer. But it's quite an interesting case. Like we had a situation where the client was just trying to like easen up the work of the replenishment managers. Like there were replenishment managers responsible for stores, for different SKUs, and they were like buying new items in stock for each store. The customer was just like interested in pretty much automating their job, helping them with alerts and stuff. And what actually their data was very, very like nicely structured. and easy to work with. And what actually happened that instead of just automating the replenishment process, we optimized their inventory management quite a bit. So basically, we decreased the average cost of inventory by around 40%. And that's like quite a lot of money, I'd say. So like for some non-critical items, we could decrease the stock bar like 70 or 80%. And the thing is like, what Randy mentioned, like sometimes you don't really know what you're doing and you might not know what your actual problem is. Because like hiring a few more replenishment managers is not that costly, but having a ton of your capital just locked in stock actually might be the problem. So having somebody who can look at your data from like different perspective a bit, and at the same time knows how to utilize that data might help your business quite a bit.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, it's yeah. Gosh, the number of companies I've seen go bust because they weren't managing inventory, or they weren't managing costs, or they weren't aware of how quickly things would go wrong for them if they didn't manage those costs just right. When you say 40%, 40% is a pretty crazy number in logistics. I mean, we get pretty excited about like 2
like
3%.
That was like
the supermarket industry, right? That's a 3% industry.
Yeah, that was like a very big construction company in the States. And the thing is like, for some reason, the store managers just freak out if there is not like too much building materials just lying in the yard. Like, but actually you can optimize that quite a bit. You can optimize that quite a bit, and people will still visit your shop even if they don't see you overstocking like crazy.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And especially if you come up with the business case, you know, which is reducing this over, then increases our profit. Yeah, but people don't realize how much they have tied up. They also don't realize how much trust costs them, you know, and that cash flow, traditionally terrible at running that. No, I was also thinking that, you know, there's there's all these sort of ground line thumb rules of thumb. Let's say procurement. Always think of there's sort of, you spend 80% of this 80-20 rule. You know, you spend 80% of your time worrying about 20% of your cases. You know, and if you can identify them, hoarding versus optimization, absolutely, Catherine, over in the chat there. That, you know, that if you know who to worry about, or if you can become aware of where you're spending all your time, and let's say with this 80-20, is it worth spending 80% of your time worrying about, or working with 20% of your suppliers, 20% of your problems? Is that a useful use of your time, or should you just cut that 20? Cool. Listen, well, I just want to remind everybody, we've got the, let's see, if you already implemented a machine, we've got a new poll out there. We've got the prize of the two guys, the 2 hours with Sigma experts. At the end of this, we talk a lot about, let's say, about this operational efficiency. Yeah, managing the bad debt that we're forced to take on as a result of Corona, if you're in the banking sector. I'm looking at but I'd like to transition to what this makes possible. All right, see that, you know, the good management of good risk management. What does that allow us to do? And there's some of these opportunities that we can seize. So we're just getting into it with Vladimir with, for example, this better management, 40% savings on inventory. Lovely one to be able to turn around. That 40% savings, that money, what can we do with that money? Oh yeah, we can do a lot of things with that money. So opportunities that you've seen made available, gentlemen. Either one of you can grab it, but if we come up with some examples of things that you've seen made possible, so either one of you can take it away. Yeah.
Opportunities that comes to my mind right away is we were working with the customer and they were like doing quite a lot of promotions. So they had a ton of promotion campaigns and they were actually gathering a lot of data on that. They were doing the A/B testing, But the problem is like just people were coming up with the promotion campaigns. And we were like, okay.
Which can be a lot of fun. I mean, I've definitely worked with a lot of people that come in, I had a great idea last night, let's do this, yeah?
Yes, that makes sense. But at the same time, like if you have a lot of data, why not feed the data to a machine learning algorithm and have the promotion campaign be generated by the algorithm instead of like just the person thinking about which is the best approach? And if you're using algorithm, you can figure out maybe like 10 different promotion campaigns and do, instead of like A/B testing, you can do A through F testing and figure out like which actually is the best. So
let's take that example and break it down for us, yeah? Because I mean, it sounds cool, and I'm nodding because I'm like, yeah, I've heard of a little company in Seattle that does this, you know, named after a big river in South America. But how do you actually get started, yeah? Because it's a lot easier to sit around with a couple of beers and come up with good ideas than to actually sit down and put this in a framework. How do you start?
So like machine learning, like on a conceptual level, it's quite easy. You just feed it a lot of data and you tell it, learn this. Like this is my success criteria. And if you try to figure out like how many people respond to the promotion campaign, this is my success criteria, just try to maximize it. Or these are the expenditures for the promotion campaign, try to minimize them. And machine learning algorithms usually like don't care what actual meaning of the data even is. You just give it the data and machine learning algorithm says like, hey, this, like if you have this combination of data, it's going to be the best. Then you can have somebody who would like try to come up with that by himself and has like good subject matter expertise, look at those numbers and say like, hey, this does make sense, this doesn't, but yeah, whatever, let's go with it. Let's try if it actually works that way.
And I think that ties into the point I was making earlier around sort of like, you know, being in roles and being in positions where you're applying human intelligence. So let the machines make the inferences, but then the human will always be required to validate whether or not those inferences are correct. And I think that's really sort of where most people need to be shifting their skill sets towards. It's becoming the SME, the actual knowledge expert that can help the machine learn. So you can throw as much data as you want at the machine. It's only ever going to be as good as the inferences that give you a high level of probability that it's matched correctly. And I think, again, that sort of, you know, just coming back to your question around how do you sort of make this happen? You got to just drive it through. You know, if you represent the firm, then you've got to be able to sort of, you know, put yourself forward and just run with an idea and do your best at trying to sort of evangelize as much as possible. And then, you know, and just wake people up to the fact that, hey, look, you know, before we had 10 people doing this, all these campaigns running in parallel. And, you know, actually, we've just managed to reduce that time significantly. And all we really need is an expert at the back end of the machine learning cycle to just confirm yes or no, this is right. Because the machine will then learn from that too. Every time you bank a yes, it will make sure that when that next data set comes through, it comes through as a yes. Every time you bank a no, it will do the opposite.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like, I'm not sure if you've seen the film called The Imitation Game about Alan Turing. And basically he was trying to crack the Nazi code during the World War II. And he built this, I believe that would be a machine learning analog computer. And like when he cracks it, like he goes with a very nice phrase, like you don't need to know German in order to crack the German code. And like that's pretty much how machine learning works. The machine learning doesn't need to understand like the intrinsic meanings of the data itself. It just like finds the patterns. And if you have the person looking at the results and like maybe fine tuning the knobs, you can reach results that are like way better than if you just have a person or have just the algorithm working alone.
Absolutely. I love this. You don't need to speak German to understand, you know, what the Germans are talking about. That it's we often ask overcomplicated questions of our data, You know, sometimes it is just worth just following the mass and just noticing the outliers and notice, for example, with your point all the way back at the very beginning about looking at the trades that fall outside of the band that we're looking at, or you're looking for the exceptions. Your management by exception is an old term. Yeah, I'm looking for sort of always looking for sort of the low-hanging fruit, you know, when we're getting going with these things. When it comes to this, yeah, do we have any tips for where to look for to find low-hanging fruit in RegTech, in compliance?
So compliance is probably like the last bastion of manual processes within any sort of financial institution. You know, everywhere else has been like, you know, on their journey for automation for quite some time, and, you know, heightened data analytics and the rest of it. So I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit all over compliance right now. All you got to do is grab a compliance analyst, and they'll probably tell you like a tale of woe, just about the amounts of sort of manual work they need to do repetitively every day. Because, you know, they've got to keep track of a forever moving landscape, and to do that manually in this environment is just impossible. You know, the key trends within the industry is that, yes, you're getting a lot of regulatory scrutiny, but the volume of regulation is going through the roof. It's not abating, and you've got multiple regulators asking for similar things in different ways. So you absolutely need the support of technology to help sort of drive that through. So I'd say for me, that's definitely a big sort of low-hanging fruit opportunity. And I guess it's just really optimization and identifying areas where you don't have an efficient operational process in place. So, you know, where do you have a duplication of feeds? Where do you have, you know, similar systems doing the same thing, or multiple vendors that you're paying for similar services? Actually, just rationalization is the key. So it's not always, some people, when they talk about low-hanging fruit and you know, cost savings, you know, the easiest go-to place is people. You know, just get rid of the headcount and you make a ton of saves. But actually, it's usually the reason why they're going for that is because they don't have the data about their enterprise. So when you've got good metadata which describes your estate, you're in a much better position to actually make savings that make your infrastructure safer, sounder, more streamlined, rather than getting rid of people. And actually, more often than not, you get rid of the wrong people. So, you know, some people will say, okay, well, this guy's been in this organization for 20 years. Actually, let's just pay them off. And, you know, that way we sort of take a massive chunk off our operational costs. The problem is you've got somebody with 20 years worth of experience, that knowledge capital walking out the door. So I think for me, low-hanging fruit is all about having, first of all, just establishing the metadata which describes your organization, and then using that to then understand where your hotspots are. You know, it could be that you've got a multitude of vendors, as I said. It could be that you've got end user compute that's taking up a lot of hours of work. It could be that you've got a multitude of feeds. You know, there's a whole host of inefficiencies all throughout, not just compliance, but any organization.
So I work a lot with entrepreneurs across the spectrum. I always, one of the pieces of advice I give to young people looking at getting into medtech or into health is I say, walk into a hospital, look for somebody that's got a pen or a pencil in their pocket. Ask what they do with that pencil and automate it. Yeah, and there's a similar thing to do in other industries. I will say medtech, you know, the medical business is pretty old-fashioned, but I love this duplication of feeds or vendors. You know, why do we have two people doing the same thing? If they have a great answer for that, cool. You know, if it's something to do with fail-safe and security, fantastic. But email processes. You know, I just bought a house. I mean, I just bought a new flat, and you know, there's one person, this one small law firm that keeps asking me for email, you know, for me to print something out, sign it, and forward it to them. There is nothing in Denmark that I need, you know, a wet signature for. I can buy a 747. I can buy, you know, a super tanker. all on e-signature in Denmark, and it is completely valid for any type of transaction. To prove my identity, I am sending them photocopies of my passport. So, you know, in your organization, somewhere in your organization, there are email processes. There are manual checks that are being, you know, the thing you described in the beginning of somebody going to Bloomberg, taking a scrape off of Bloomberg and putting that into an Excel document. Every organization has dozens of these things happening every day. Look at them, grab them, and then have that person do something else with their life.
Agree, agree. It's all about empowering your people.
Absolutely. Cool. Vladimir, any last thoughts here as we approach the end? Places to start is a great one to leave people with.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I believe we had a pretty nice talk. Final words. I would like really encourage people to play with data science in general. It's a very, very beautiful field of science in general, and it probably makes you like look at some things in a slightly different way. And like sometimes you, after playing with a lot of data science, you can start seeing patterns that you didn't see.
Places to go play with this. That was just, you inspired me to think, you said go play, which made me think of small kids' sandboxes. And Neo4j has a couple of sandboxes that you can go and play in. You can download the Panama Papers if you have shady neighbors, like some of us. But I was thinking, yeah, places to go and play with these tools. Got me, I was going to chuck it into the chat, but your suggestions.
Go visit Datrix AI. We have a free beta to work with. You can look at the sample data sets. You can just upload your own data set and figure out if machine learning can do anything nice with it.
A lot of this stuff is a lot less complicated than you think.
Well, we're trying to make it as uncomplicated and as engaging as possible. Cool,
cool. All right, well, Randeep, you guys, both you fellas, anything to add here at the very end? We've got that prize, and Sigma will be in touch with the lucky winner for the 2 hours of free consulting. You guys got any last comments, Randeep, Vladimir?
Only just to say thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. You know, from my perspective, I'm a big evangelist of, you know, using data to sort of unlock potential. So if anybody wants to pick up with me offline about any of that, then happy to have those discussions. But thank you very much, Nick and Vladimir.
Absolutely. Yeah, listen, it's been a pleasure. You still, oh, let's see, the, hey, Freddie, thank you very much. Thanks for being so generous with your time. Our pleasure. This is a fun conversation. Vladimir, it's been a fabulous. I've hung out with Randeep before in person and online. Vladimir, pleasure to hang out here together today. And for those of you out there asking questions, thank you very much for those questions. Hoarding versus optimization is always a struggle. Catherine Mazzrillo from Boston. Oh my God. Absolutely. The New York Yankees don't have to hoard all of their runs. They could spread them out a little bit more so that we win a World Series again. It's been a little while, and I don't like it when other people win the World Series. The rest of you can Google what that means. And for the rest of us, listen, it's been a pleasure. I really encourage you strongly to go out and play with this stuff because it is much more user-friendly than it was even just a couple of years ago. And oh my God, it can be powerful. With that, live long and prosper. Thank you very much to all of you.
Pleasure talking to you.
And pleasure.
Thank you all. It's a real pleasure. Yes. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.